This video will go over adding in floors and roofs. It should be another on the shorter side video, probably around an hour or so. So let's begin. So we have here where we left off with the last video. I literally have not touched the project at all. So we have our floor plan, we've got our foundation, footing, our walls. But if I orbit around, so if I hold shift in the scroll wheel and orbit myself around, it is just kind of this big empty abyss in there. So there is no floor in my house currently. There's no roof as well or ceiling, and so we're going to add some of those features in today. So to add in the floor, you could really be in a floor plan view or a three-dimensional view. I'm going to do this based in the floor plan. So I'm just going to go to my level 1 floor plan view, which I can either find up here in these tabs that I have open, or I could shuffle through my open tabs by holding Control and then hitting the tab button on my keyboard. It will just shuffle through all of the ones I currently have open. Or I could double click on it over here. Bunch of different ways. I'm going to get the same end result. Now while I'm in here, to place my floor, I'm just going to be in the Architecture tab, and I'm going to click on the Floor button, which Revit's prompting me, do you want to save? So I'll say sure, let's save. Now, I mentioned this in the very first Revit video, but just to reiterate, things like floors, stairs, roofs, they all bring up this kind of boundary or this modification menu that if I don't choose one of these two options, I'm not going to be able to do anything else. So if I go into the Architecture tab and I try to go like place a window, everything in here is grayed out because while I'm currently in this floor boundary mode, I can't do anything else. And so just as a heads up, if while you're working you can't do anything, check to see if there's a little green tab here at the end, and if so, it's probably because you need to do something in there first. So I can use my floor boundary options. I can select specific ones myself. So I could draw in my own boundaries. I could draw in with the line tool, the rectangle tool, polygons, whether they're inscribed or circumscribed. I could draw a circle, I could draw an arc, I could draw a spline, which is kind of like a curved shape that I can edit around. But what I most often am going to use when creating a floor or a roof or anything of the sort is this pick lines or this pick walls options. So pick walls is what it does by default, and that's just where I can select the walls that I want to make my floor a part of, and then I can say, okay, I'm good to go. Before I do that, I just want to look at some of the things that my floor is doing. So for instance, my boundary is only going to where the stud is, which in my case, that's not necessarily where I want it to be. I want it to kind of go to the outside of the stud, not the inside, because my walls are going to be sitting on top of my floor. And so to change that, I can hit escape once, hit it again, and then I can drag these to go up or down, which let me just Control Z to undo. Control Z, there we go. Oops, okay. I'm just gonna go back into pick walls, click on that one again, Control Z or escape twice, and I can click on these arrows to make it go to the outside of it. I could also just draw in a rectangle myself without using pick walls. The other thing to take note with this boundary too are these little lines here that are only ever going to appear on the first one you select. And what those little lines are referring to is just which way the floor joists are running. So if, for instance, I went to pick walls and I chose that one first, now we can see the floor joists are running horizontally, which in this case is not what I want them to do. So I'm just going to Control Z a bunch. and make them run the way that I want to. It wouldn't necessarily matter if it's on this wall or this one. It just would make it that which way the joists are running that I want to. And depending on how much detail I'm going to or information I'm going to want to pull out of my drawing, that might not even matter, especially if I'm just doing a generic model to kind of sell a concept. I'm not going to have construction drawings. I'm not going to put an extension that makes a framing plan out of the whole thing. And so which way my floor joists are facing really would be useless information. For this though, since I know my floor joists are running vertically across this smaller dimension, I would want to at least try to make sure that they're lining up. The other thing for this too is what type of floor we have. So right now it's just a generic 12-inch floor, not necessarily what I'd like. So I can change it to a couple of different options here, or just like with my walls, I can go into edit type, I can duplicate, and I'm just going to name this one floor. And then I can edit the structure to have several parts to it. So our floor in this building really only just had two parts to it. It had that 2x8 stud, or 2x8 joist, excuse me, and then some plywood sheathing on top of it. So for the structure, I'm going to just change the category to be joist. And I'm going to change it to this wood joist rafter with batt insulation. So I chose this over that softwood option, just because this is going to have a little bit more when it comes to R value if I wanted to play around with some of those numbers and things that come out of it. And again, I'm just going to change its thickness to be whatever the actual dimension is. So that would be 0 feet, 7 1/4. And then I have a finish layer of plywood. So I'm going to click on by category, click on that little ellipses. I'm going to change that to plywood. Okay. And it had a thickness of 0.75. So I've got an overall thickness of 8. I've got some more information about its physical properties. And I'll click OK and OK. Now, we can also change the offset for it. So by default, this is starting at our level 1 and then going 8 inches up. So I'm actually going to change the offset to be -8 inches, just so the top of the floor is going to sit perfectly at that 0, 0 height. We could also play around with where level 1 is, depending on how we want to set it up. But I prefer to just have the level 1 floor and then offset level 1 be where the top of the floor is and then offset it down whatever the thickness is. And I'm just going to click OK, and I get this little, not warning, but more just kind of a question of, do you want to attach walls to the bottom of it? And I'm just going to say sure. And then I'll click on X out of it. And for some reason, it didn't quite work, or maybe it did. I don't know. We'll see. Why did it do that with the floor? I thought I said attach. Let's see if I say no. Let me Control Z. So I did undo, which means that that floor is, or did that just fix my problem? Because I can see my floor is in there. And I can check to see if my problem got fixed by making a section view. So I just went into the floor plan. This is getting ahead a little bit in our videos, but it's okay. It's never too bad to practice something multiple times. And I'm going to create a building section with this button in the quick toolbar, or in the view tab, there's the section button. And I'm just going to put a section cut straight through here. So I just clicked to start it, clicked to end it, and then it made a new area in our project browser for section views. And I can double click on section 1 to see what is happening. Okay, I think I see a little bit more of what's happening now, which that's good. But I do want my walls to just go a little bit further down. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the exterior walls. So if I click on one of them and then I hold the control key, I can click on multiple ones, and I'm going to bring them down a base offset of that -8. That would be -8 feet, so 0 space 8. And it's saying that they overlap. I'm just going to say that's fine, because what it's warning me is that my concrete foundation walls here are, or my CMU foundation walls are overlapping with this. And then I'm going to orbit around a little bit. And just like with AutoCAD, I can highlight a bunch of things at once by just clicking and dragging a window around them. And I'm going to give these a top constraint of up to level 1 with a top offset of -0 space 8. And so that way they shouldn't be overlapping anymore. And there we go. And now I have my floor in here. Let me just go back to kind of a nice isometric view. So I've got my floor at the exact height. Sometimes it's really tricky to click on your floor. So if you need to edit it after the fact. So sometimes in a 3D view, you can just hover over the edge of it and select it. Another easy way to get it selected is to just highlight a bunch of things. And that's why my properties bar now is just saying, like, listen, we can't really give you properties on this because you have so many different things selected. But what I can do is go into my filters and say, okay, I don't want to select any doors. I don't want any foundations, any walls, any windows. I just want floors. And that just filters everything out of what I had just highlighted and only now is giving me this floor. And if I wanted to edit anything about it, I can then just click on Edit Boundary. And in this 3D view, it lets me edit it. I could then double click on level 1 to go back and edit it. Or if I am in the 3-dimensional view, what I'll sometimes do is just click directly on the top of the view cube. And that takes me out of that 3-dimensional orbit view, and I am just looking directly at the top. So we can change that joist span direction if we wanted to. So I can click on that and say, okay, I want it to go with this one, but I am going to just keep it on that. I can add a slope to it. So if I had a reason to add in kind of a ramp to the floor, or maybe I'm creating a just ramp in general that's kind of acting outside as like a handicap ramp or something like that, I can add in a slope. And when I add a slope into it, I'll just put one in here. I then can define what its overall height is. I can figure out, like what exactly slope I would want it to be, but I don't want this to have a slope to it. In your project, in your Revit assignment project, you are going to add a slope. And even in your final project with what the prompt is going to be, you're probably going to want to have slopes in there somewhere, would be my assumption. But I guess it would depend on how you make your design, because it is a little bit of an open-ended project. And so I'll just click OK. This time I'm going to say don't attach. Ensure join geometry. And let's just look at it 3-dimensionally just to make sure it didn't mess anything up. Yeah, so I think that attach top to bottom is what messed up my previous one, where I didn't want these to kind of look weird, where that floor was kind of jetting out. And what it looks like it's done, which is what I prefer it to do, is see how it's kind of sliced. So if I delete that wall, we can see that it kind of sliced this exterior wall so that the sheathing and siding does go all the way down to where the foundation is, and then that stud part just sits on top of the floor joist. So let me Control Z to get that back. Another thing too that's kind of helpful of just looking at some interior details while you're maneuvering yourself around is the hiding and isolating options. So I can click on this wall and then I can right click and I can hide it in a particular view. And I can either hide an element or I can hide a category. So hiding an element hides just that one singular instance that you have selected. So if I do hide in view element, it gets rid of that wall temporarily, but it's still there. It's the same as kind of like hiding a layer. If I click on something and then right click, hide in view category, it hides everything that's in that similar category. So it didn't hide just that one window, it hid all of the windows. To get those back, you can click on the little light bulb here, and it shows you everything you have hidden in this pink color, in which you can then click on it and say unhide, or you can right click on it, unhide, and you can even just highlight a lot of stuff and just say unhide it all. Um, Now this UCS thing is going to pop up though, which I'm not going to be a fan of, but okay, I can get over it. I can get over it. Let me right click, hide that element. So that's kind of like an origin point of our drawing. I'm just not a huge fan of having that visible. You can also just do kind of quickly using the isolate. So if I like click on this wall, I can just click on these little glasses down here and say temporarily hide that category. And then just to get everything back, so that just hid every wall in the entire drawing. To get it back, I would just click on the glasses again and say reset. Or I can isolate an element or a category. So isolating it makes everything go away except for whatever you have selected. So hide gets rid of what you have selected. Isolate gets rid of everything but what you have selected. And then reset. And again, too, any hiding or isolating you do is only dependent in that particular view. So I can take this window, right click, hide element. It's hidden in this 3D view, but if I go into my floor plan, it's still here and visible because it only is just dependent on that one particular view. Let me just go back and whoops. I'll say, show me what I have hidden, highlight it, unhide, and then get out of that mode. Or I could click on the light bulb down here to get out of it. And so that's adding in floors. You can use, just like with the walls and like we didn't do too much edit type with windows and doors, but just like with walls, we can edit type them and we can make our own custom floors. And you're going to draw them based on a boundary. And you kind of want to think about, okay, well, construction wise, where would the outside of these floors sit? And so in our situation, since we were framing this with platform framing, our floor was sitting directly underneath our exterior walls. Now, for adding in a roof, we're going to use the roof button. So if I try to apply a roof in three-dimensional mode, a lot of times it'll warn me that I'm making a roof on the lowest level. I think in this case it probably didn't since I had made this top of footing level here. But if I do it three-dimensionally, see it's automatically saying that the base level is level 1, which is not going to be what I want my base level of my roof to be. So I'm just going to X out of this to see if I can get that error code if maybe I'm in the floor plan for level 1. And I go to make a roof. So still it didn't give me an error code, but it is showing me here that the base level is level 1, which I'm going to make my roof like this anyway to show you how I could fix it if I forgot to switch this over to say like, okay, well I want my roof to start at level 2 or on the ceiling where the ceiling level is, or maybe if I have 3 levels or 4. I'm going to leave mine set at level 1 because if I mess it up, I don't have to restart the whole thing. I can easily change that bit. And we have defined in here too, things about the rafters, things about the slope. which are going to start popping up once I add in my dimensions. Um, and then we also have our overhang here as well. And we can have sides that slope or not, depending on if we have this checked off. We can change an overhang for it by default. So our building has 0 overhang. So I'm just going to click on all 4 walls. I get those same boundary options up here that I did with my floor. And without changing any settings related to slope or anything else, I'm just going to click the check mark, and I'm going to look at my building in 3D, and there is my roof sitting inside my house. Not ideal, not really what I wanted it to be. So what I can do is just click on it, and I can change its base level to say, oh, instead of level 1, go up to the ceiling level, and then it just picks it right up. So if you don't do your roof intentionally in the right spot, you can always go change it. The other thing that I did incorrectly for this roof is that I have all 4 sides sloped, so I made a hip style roof, which is not what we want. We want a shed style roof. So I can click on that roof and go into edit footprint. And just like with my floors, I could do this in a floor plan, or I can just on my view cube click on the top view. And if you don't get top right away, you might have to click twice. It's okay. And I can redefine what some of these sides are sloping towards or for. So if I just get rid of slope on these 2 sides, so if I uncheck define slope, click on here, and I can also uncheck it here in the constraints, and then I click OK, and I hold shift and the scroll wheel, I now have a gable style roof. Still not exactly what I want, but at least we're getting a little bit closer to what I want. And I can also change the slope over here. So if I wanted to, I can say that I want it to have a slope of 312, but still just not ideal. You can also drag this here to just kind of redefine the slope. This can be helpful for just playing around with like ideas, but ultimately when you are making a finalized product, you don't want to just drag for your slope, because then I'm getting this super weird number, and no one is going to build your slope with 117ths of 128ths to it. So this is where I would just say like, okay, I want it to be 4/12 or 5/12. That's where you would just go and type in a number that, makes actual sense. But I'm just going to edit my footprint again, go to the top, because for this one, I'm just going to want just that side sloped. And so I'm going to uncheck define roof slope. I can click on this line, and I can also change the slope while I'm editing the roof footprint. So I could click on the little text box here that pops up. I could type it in over here and say I want it to be 3/12. And I can also edit the overhang if I wanted to. So I can click on it and say I want it to have a 1-foot overhang, and it'll bring it out 1 foot. I can also change it up here. I can use my arrow keys to nudge it around if I wanted to. I am just going to leave the overhang at 0, so I'm going to Control Z my way back. Even though you'd really never want an overhang of 0 foot 0 inches, we're just going to pretend. And I'll click OK, and I'll orbit myself around again, and now I have my roof with its slope. My issue here is that it's just wide open, not great for my building. And so for that, I'm going to attach all of my walls to my roof. So if I click on the wall itself, I can then come up to this modify tool of attach the top to a base, and then click on the roof. And for that one, we can kind of see that it just made it that wall now is attached to it there. So again, click on my wall, attach top to base, click on the roof. And we can see with that one now that it clearly brought it up. The nice thing with attach top to base is, again, if I changed my roof slope, So if I come here and scroll down a bit, and I made my roof slope 6/12, the wall is going to change with it because I said that the wall had to be attached to the roof. But I'm just going to make it back to 3/12. Click on my wall, attach top to base, click on my roof, and I can, unless I'm mistaken, I can select multiple walls at once, so I can select this guy and this guy by just holding control while I select all of them. And if at any point you select something that you didn't mean to, so like, oh, I wanted just these walls and I got those windows, if I hold shift and click, I can deselect things out of whatever I have, or I could filter them out. But I have these two walls, attach top to base, click on the roof. If I want to detach things, I could just detach top to base and it leaves it open. Because like for instance with this one, I technically didn't want them attached because I'm going to add a little ceiling in there. So click on the wall, attach top to base, bada bing. And now I have all of my walls. Well, let's look at that better 3D. I've got my walls attached to my roof line. Next up is I'm going to add a ceiling in, which can sometimes be what students mess up pretty frequently with. So they don't mess up finding the button. It's pretty obvious, hopefully, in the toolbar up at the top, which one of those buttons is meant for ceilings, but it's that button that says ceiling on it. The issue is that I always recommend doing your ceilings in your floor plan. So if I go into the ceiling tool, I can then it'll see it's even highlighting in orange where the ceiling would go. I can add different types of ceilings. So I can say that like I just want it to be gypsum wallboard. And I get this warning here that's saying, hey, we made your ceiling the way you wanted us to, but you can't see it in this view. And a lot of students just say, I don't know where my ceiling is. So then what do? They just keep clicking. And currently, I've now made 23 ceilings, if you add in the one that I had put there beforehand. And it's warning me, hey, you have all of these ceilings in here, and if you go make a schedule, your schedule is going to be all out of whack because you just kept placing ceilings inside of ceilings inside of ceilings using this automatic button. So if I go into my 3D view, and I just hit escape a couple of times, and then I come in here and I hide my wall. I've got my ceiling there, but good, great, just how I wanted it. Let me just do a little quick highlight of a bunch of things and then filter. Yeah, I have 22 ceilings all sitting in top of each other. Not ideal. So when those little warnings pop up in the bottom corner, it's important to read what they're saying, because sometimes they're just saying like, hey, we did exactly what you wanted, but you just can't see it right now. Or it's saying, hey, this window is going to be pretty weird where you currently have it because you have it sitting inside of this wall or things like that. They're not necessarily saying that it's incorrect or it's incapable of doing that. It's just saying, hey, if you try to make a schedule, you're going to have 22 extra ceilings. You're going to wind up buying materials maybe for 22 extra ceilings, and you might not want to do that. So I'm just going to check it that I just have my ceiling selected and just delete all of them. And then unhide my wall. I personally do think that the temporary hide isolate is better than the right click option, but for me what happened was that I got so used to that right click option because that's how I first learned it, that now it's hard for me to get out of that habit. But I'll just go back into here, back into ceiling. I could also sketch my own custom one. I like the automatic one, and sometimes too it will divide it by room. And so it's just saying that, hey, we made your ceiling, you just can't see it right now. And so that's fine, that's all I need. And now I have a little ceiling in there. And if I go look at that section view I made, that section cut, it's got my ceiling. It's clipping into my roof a little bit, which I'm not a huge fan of, but that's okay. It's gonna say what's that, but that's the little cut here for the ceiling line, which if you don't like it going all the way across, there is a way to break it. Which let's see if I can remember how to do that. I know that just puts it over here. And apparently that adds an elbow. Don't know why they make it look like a break line. Is it an edit type? Well, I guess I'm not going to sit here and waste all of your time as I look around for that. So I'm going to pause and figure out how to do it. Well, there was a reason why I was having trouble remembering it. It's because it doesn't exist. You can't split level lines, I found out, which is real cruddy in my opinion. I feel like it would be beneficial to be able to split these up. Whoops. Sometimes it's hard too to just move and try to get all of them to move together. So if you see that little dotted blue line, that tends to mean that it's going to move all of them at once and lock them all together. If you grab it by that little circle there rather than grabbing it by here, but now that I've got my floor plan all nice and done, I've got my ceiling added in, I've got all of my elevations done, I've got my floor, I've got my roof. Now I can add in the site of my building. So before I start that off, I want to think about, okay, well, what level is my site at altogether? And so the ground line we've established is 6 inches below where the foundation starts. So we have the top of our floor, which is at 0, 0, then 8 inches of floor, and then 6 inches of foundation. So we were going to have a little bit of foundation exposed to it. So that means our overall ground line is at -1 foot 4 inches. Let me just double check that, because no, wait, that would be 1 foot 2, right? 6 plus 8 is 14. Yes, 1 foot 2. That's why I have to check it, because I'm not a math kind of person. I don't know if you guys could tell that by now. So I could do that in a couple of different things. I could do it in my site plan, which is more than likely where I'm going to do it. Or again, the site is something I tend to add in the 3-dimensional view and just force myself to look at the very, very top of the object. And to add in a site, I'm going to do that in the Massing and Site tab, and then there's the option for Topo Surface. So this is where we can add in the different topography lines. You can actually import in maps or different CAD files that you have already for your site. So if you have a 3-dimensional CAD file, this is where I had mentioned with SketchUp how you can get the topography from SketchUp Pro. It'll find it in Google Maps, it'll download it, and then you can then import that into AutoCAD, export it from AutoCAD into Revit, and then have kind of your site made without really having to take a lot of measurements from. Or maybe if you have information from a contractor, you can, or excuse me, a surveyor, you can just kind of take whatever information they've given you, you can import it directly into your site here in AutoCAD. But we're just going to make one by ourselves. So to do that, we're just going to place some points around, and over here is where we can change the elevations. So instead of having our elevation be at 0, 0, I'm going to make it -1 space 2, enter, so that way it's 1 foot 2 feet underneath the top of our floor. And really all it's going to take is 4 points, or rather 3 points, to start making a topo surface. So if I do 1, 2, 3, it'll start it off, and then I can add a fourth one. Now, because this shed is just existing kind of really not within any particular space, it's okay to just have it at this completely flat area. So if I hold shift and right click, we can see that it's just made like a flat patch of dirt underneath our house. However, if I wanted to switch off the various elevations that it might be facing, I then can, say -1'8", and I could add in additional points. And then if we look at it three-dimensionally again, and actually let's look at it directly from the front, we can see that it's slightly sloping down because this is 6 inches underneath where here is. Same thing then of if I do, like -3 feet and add in some points, we can see now that there's a much more dramatic, well, we could put dramatic maybe in quotation marks, slope happening here. What we aren't seeing too much of in this particular drawing, or rather in this particular surface, is topography lines. And that's just because of how it's set by default, and this is not how Revit used to be. This was a change they made in like 2016 or something, which really threw a lot of students off. And so I believe I mentioned it in the videos that I recorded for your Revit project, but if I didn't, I'll mention them in this video, that in the packet, the topography is going to look different than what your topography looks like by default. And I can show you how to change that in here as well. So I'm just going to click check to finish making my topography. So now I'm out of the making topography option, and I can click on here and I can edit my topography to kind of maybe show some more details than what it currently is. If I go into my site plan as well, where's my option for changing it? This will change my material, but I don't want to change my material. I want to do it in views. Why am I blanking? Manage, I believe it's manage actually. Hold on, let me pause and remember what the heck I'm doing. All right, back. So to change the settings of how the site look, in the Massing and Site tab, if you click on this tiny little arrow, it's kind of the same way that we would get to like the dimension style settings. This is how we can get to the Massing and Site settings. And we then can change what intervals we see contour lines at. So right now it's showing us every 10 feet. And since we're not even covering a 10-foot difference, because it's -1 foot 2 inches over here, -3 feet over here, that's why we're not seeing any slope. So if I say actually that I want it to show me a contour difference at every 2 inches, now I have all of those big slopes going on there. Maybe I don't want something that small, like necessarily on a project, but, or like, so maybe I just want, like every 1 foot for it to have it. So that way I've got a few little topography lines there. But that's just how, if your topography lines aren't showing up, how you could get them to show up. And then of course we can change our material. It's a little bit different than changing the material in your like for your walls and your roof, which I just now remembered we didn't change the material for our roof. We can go back and change it. It's easy peasy. But so instead of going into edit type, I'm just going to come here to edit my material, click on the little ellipses, and then find some material. So like I'm going to search for grass, which there is none preloaded in. So then I'm just going to go and load in this grass layer. For grass, I usually don't check off use render appearance because it picks like this almost black color, which I'm not a fan of. Because I like my 3D view to often be in that consistent colors, I tend for grass to just choose my own green color. And I can even go into this appearance and I can switch which type of grass it might be. So they've got all of these different types of grass preloaded in with materials. If I go to this view tab, I can give it thumbnails, which unfortunately I can't do larger thumbnails, but I'm just going to scroll myself down to site work. That way at least I can see some of them. There we go. Whoops, I went past it. And pick like maybe a different grass if I wanted to. I like that one. Why not? And even then, maybe I could check off user render appearance. Yeah, so that green I don't mind. The default grass, though, I just kind of think is yucky looking. And I'll click OK. And if I go into my 3D model, it's now that green grass. And if I switch over to realistic for a moment, we can see, and this is where kind of some of those like textures might come into play. So like this grass looks kind of fake. Like it isn't real actual grass in there, so we can see that repeating pattern over and over again. This is where I may, bring it into Photoshop to further change things around, maybe add in some other kind of details to it. A lot of times for projects, at least that I work on and my students are working on, the site like isn't from an actual building or something to be too accurate. It's just something to put in that background for the camera to help make the drawing maybe a little bit more realistic. And so with that too, I want to always kind of just go into edit surface. And it's a good idea for renderings to just really have these points fairly far out. And so we're going to do renderings like in about 2 weeks. I'll go over cameras and rendering. Some of you guys might get super ahead in your project and just get them done. But the more expansive you make that site, and maybe the more variation with height you add to it, the better it's going to help with a rendering, because otherwise it's going to start to look maybe a little weird and you'll have these weird little gray gaps pop up in your drawings that just kind of take away that realistic aspect to it. So I just made a huge groundwork around my area. Um, Same thing too with, whoops, so it won't let me add anything else in because currently I'm modifying and editing the surface. So it's saying like, hey, you either need to say cancel the changes or finish the changes to go do other things. But I can add in site components, which is where I'll have lots of different trees I can choose from. If the tree you're looking for isn't popping up, then you can go into load family. And I believe trees are in. I used to have all of these folders memorized, and thankfully I don't anymore. But they are in, I guess site would make sense. There's a nice little sign. Yeah. And that thing I like too is that it gives you that little preview there of what things are. Or are they in Entourage? No. Still don't know where they put those people, which is a real bummer. Little kitchen stuff. Well, I'm not gonna. Oh, planting would probably be it. Duh, DB. So there's some shrubs, there's some trees. It's just gonna like, so it is just labeled as just tree fall, but it'll load in lots of different types of trees, so it's not just a single tree in that one. So there's trees from the fall, there are leafy trees, there are conifer trees, and then you can place them around. One thing I recommend doing with things like this is, so here's also a good example. I place this tree while I'm in the 3D view and I'm thinking, oh, it's not there. Why isn't it there? Because the level this tree is placed at is the top of my footing. And so if I hold shift and scroll wheel, my tree is there. Well, that's weird. It didn't put it at the bottom of the footing. I'm gonna say it's there, it's just underneath this ground, and it could be just because I'm in this realistic view that's why it wasn't showing up too well. But you kind of just want to keep in mind of where exactly are you placing things, what level are they being put on. If I put them on, like level 1, they're just going to be floating like 8 inches, or rather a foot off of the ground. So I could do that and then just give them a negative elevation offset. Um, the other thing too is using the space bar to kind of orbit the trees around a little bit, especially if you're using the same tree multiple times. So let me just hit escape twice to end the command. And that's because, again, if I switch myself over to this realistic view, if I have the same tree, the exact same tree plopped in there 12 times, it's going to become kind of noticeable that that background is repeating and all of the leaves are the same. So rotating them around with the space bar, or even just clicking on them and using like the rotate tool to start them off in one place and then kind of just put them on a slight angle, can really help just show a little bit of variation in there. And then of course you could just go into like Photoshop and add in extra trees if you want to. I've got, which I guess I'll put like a um, in my email that I send out, and I'll put a little note to remind myself, is there's this one video from a YouTuber that I like in which he kind of went over lots of the websites that he gets some different assets like trees and stuff for Photoshop in there. They're not necessarily components that can go directly into Revit, but they still can be just used for different renderings that come out of Revit. Things for components that can come into Revit, there are lots of websites for that, and we'll go over that next Monday when I go over components and stuff. Now, let me just change my roof, because if I hover over this, I can see that it's a generic 12-inch roof, which makes kind of no sense if everything else in my house is super clearly defined and then my roof just isn't. That's just silly. So I'm going to click on it, edit type, duplicate it, and I'm just going to call this one roof, edit the structure, and this is where I can add in my different materials. So let's see, I'm going to have my metal decking, my plywood, my stud, and then technically my gypsum wallboard, but you know what, I'm actually going to delete that layer because I just have that ceiling directly in there on this model. And this will be a finish. This will be a substrate. Let's just, for the sake of practice, we'll add a membrane layer in too. So I'll insert in a membrane, a vapor kind of barrier here. And so for my finish material, I'm going to add in corrugated decking. Isn't it? Why is nothing popping up? Forgot exactly what they call it in here. Let's see. I just sworn it was called like metal decking or something like that. But they're saying no search results found. Let's just filter our things to just only show me metal. There it is, metal deck. Okay, and let me just check with appearance that it's what I want it to look like, which I think it is the one I want, unless I want metal furring. Which, whoops. which that's okay. Sure, that's what we'll go with. Metal decking, and it has a thickness of 1 inch. Membrane layer, which we're just going to make vapor retarder. And remember that for a membrane layer, it has to have a thickness of 0. We cannot give it a thickness. Our substrate layer, which is plywood. And okay. And on our roof, it's 3/4 of an inch. And then our wood joist, or our wood rafter, excuse me, with some batt insulation, okay. And that has a thickness of 7¼ because I don't have the gypsum on the other side, then this is going to come off a little bit different than what the project has, but that's okay. And I'll click OK, and OK, and it updates it in here, which let me just get out of realistic so that way things don't get too laggy. But because I have these walls attached to the roof, everything's all nice and great. Now, the last problem I'm going to have with my site is the fact that this ground is just going all the way through my building. And a lot of times what happens is if students don't, like instead of changing it to be like -1'2" like I did here, they just leave it set at 0, 0, and then it's going through the floor and it just looks really weird and bad. Even with this off, that -1'2", it's still a little bit too much, or rather like it's going through my building and I don't want it to do with that. And we can see if we look at it in a section view that the ground is not doing what I want it to do. I want it to kind of go and cut downwards. So instead of editing the surface to just have like a little box in there that goes down for my crawl space, what I'm going to do instead is add in a building pad. So for that, I'm going to just click on building pad, and I want to add a building pad around my building. And so I just did it from the interior of it, so that way it was going kind of like around the foundation walls. And then I'm going to leave this height offset set at 0 so we just see kind of what it does. And then let's go into our section view. What does it do? Not a whole lot. So this right here is my building pad with a height offset of 0. If I give it a height offset of -2, we can see now that it pushes the ground down -2 feet for our site. So what I'm going to do then is push it down so that this way it's right in line with where the top of our footing is. So I'm going to do -3'4", and now it pushes it down, and so now we have kind of this little excavated space for our foundation. And this in particular is not something I want showing up in our section view, and so this would be a case of right click, hide in view element. It's gone in this view, but it's still there in our model, and it's still there kind of helping control everything. So the ground itself is just pushed down or kind of dug out or excavated for our foundation now, and it's no longer inside of our building. And so for this video, that's kind of where I want to leave it. Again, like I mentioned last time, I don't want to overwhelm you guys with too much stuff in a short amount of time. Next week, I'll go over adding in stairs and adding in different components, as well as sheets and title blocks. So if you're following along with this for that extra credit for a Revit assignment, then just make sure you save your work for what you've got so far, and that's just click on the save button up here. If you're not following along with it, but you're just watching to take it in, no worries. Like I said, doing this building in Revit is just extra credit, but you do have that other Revit project with the Getting Started guide, and there is the packet instructions and videos. And like always, if you're struggling with any of this stuff in class, please feel free to reach out to me via email, come to office hours, and you'll hear from me next week. Goodbye.